Stalingrad. The battle that broke Hitler's army. The city was dying, but it refused to surrender. In the frozen hell of Stalingrad, something unprecedented was unfolding. The supposedly invincible Wehrmacht was being ground to dust, street by street, building by building, room by room. And here's what makes this story truly chilling. Hitler's greatest military disaster wasn't caused by some brilliant strategic masterstroke. It was caused by his own pathological inability to admit a mistake. The trap springs shut August 23, 1942. General Friedrich, Paulus's Sixth Army, the same force that had crushed Poland and steamrolled through France, reached the Volga River. They'd done it. Stalingrad, named after the Soviet dictator himself, was within their grasp. The Germans celebrated, Hitler was ecstatic, but they didn't know they'd just walked into the largest death trap in military history. What was supposed to be a quick capture of an industrial city became a meat grinder that would consume over 2 million casualties. But here's the twist that haunts historians to this day. Stalingrad wasn't even strategically essential. Hitler wanted it primarily for psychological reasons to capture Stalin's namesake city. Ego versus ego. Two dictators playing chess with human lives. When the hunters became the hunted by September, the Germans controlled 90% of the city. Paulus reported victory was imminent. Soviet commanders were preparing evacuation plans across the Volga. The battle seemed over. But in the smoldering ruins, something extraordinary was happening. The Red Army was learning to fight in a way that nullified every German advantage. In the skeletal remains of factories and apartment buildings, Soviet soldiers discovered that German superiority in tanks, aircraft, and artillery meant nothing when combat happened at arm's length. They pioneered hugging tactics, staying so close to German lines that the Luftwaffe could end bomb without hitting their own troops. One Soviet commander described it perfectly. Every German soldier must be made to feel that he is living under the muzzle of a Russian gun. And there was Vasily Chukov, the Soviet general who turned desperation into doctrine. "We'll defend the city or die in the attempt," he declared, and he meant it literally. His headquarters was a dugout so close to German lines that enemy grenades regularly landed outside. He could hear German conversations. When subordinates suggested retreating across the Volga, Chukov had the boats destroyed. There would be no retreat because there could be no retreat. German soldiers invented a new word for what they were experiencing. Rattenkrieg, the war of the rats. Battles for individual staircases lasted days. The Soviets mastered storm group tactics, small teams of specialists who cleared buildings room by room with grenades, submachine guns, and sheer brutality. The average life expectancy of a Soviet soldier in Stalingrad was 24 hours. For officers, it was 3 days. Consider the story of Pavlov's house, a 4-story apartment building held by Sergeant Yakov Pavlov and about 30 men. For 58 days, this single building held off more German assaults than some countries did during the entire war. They fortified it with mines, barbed wire, and machine gun nests. They knocked holes through walls to create firing positions. The building became a miniature fortress, and Hitler's army couldn't take it. One German officer wrote in his diary, "We are fighting for every pile of ruins, every cellar. Every square meter costs us a sea of blood." The psychological toll was devastating. German soldiers, accustomed to rapid victories and clear objectives, found themselves trapped in an endless nightmare of close-quarters combat. Snipers like the legendary Vasily Zaitsev turned every exposed moment into a death sentence. The city itself seemed to be fighting them. Winter was coming, and unlike the Soviets, the Germans were not prepared. The stroke that changed everything. November 19, 1942. While Paulus's army was fixated on capturing the last sliver of Stalingrad, Soviet Marshal Zhukov sprung Operation Uranus. Here's what makes this brilliant. The Soviets didn't attack the powerful German Sixth Army directly. They smashed through the weaker Romanian and Italian armies, protecting the German flanks. Within 4 days, 250,000 German soldiers were surrounded. The hunters had become the hunted. And now Hitler made the decision that sealed their fate. His generals begged him to authorize a breakout while there was still time. Paulus wanted to retreat. But Hitler, sitting in his comfortable headquarters hundreds of miles away, refused. The Sixth Army would hold. Göring promised the Luftwaffe could supply them by air. They needed 800 tons of supplies daily. The Luftwaffe never delivered more than 300 tons, even on good days. Hitler's hubris had sentenced his best army to death. The frozen apocalypse. December and January brought temperatures of -30 degrees Celsius. German soldiers, still in summer uniforms, froze to death at their posts. They burned books, furniture, even their own weapons for warmth. Horses were slaughtered for food. Then the soldiers ate the leather of their boots. Wounded men couldn't be evacuated. They lay in unheated cellars, their breath forming icicles, waiting to die. Field Marshal von Manstein attempted a rescue operation, coming within 30 miles of the pocket. Hitler still refused to authorize a breakout. The relief force was itself driven back. The Sixth Army was alone, dying, with no hope of rescue. Yet still Hitler demanded they fight on. The letters German soldiers wrote home during these final weeks are haunting. "We won't leave Russia," one wrote, but as a corpse. Another penned, "It's also pointless. The whole thing is sick." These weren't defeatist soldiers, these were men who understood they'd been sacrificed for nothing. The surrender that shook the Reich. February 2, 1943, Paulus, whom Hitler had promoted to Field Marshal. Just days earlier, a cynical gesture since no German Field Marshal had ever surrendered. Of the 250,000 Germans encircled, fewer than 6,000 would ever see Germany again. The Sixth Army, the conqueror of Europe, simply ceased to exist. In Germany, 3 days of national mourning were declared. It was the first time the Nazi regime admitted a major defeat. The myth of invincibility was shattered. Germans began asking a question that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. Could they actually lose this war? The echoes through history. But here's what makes Stalingrad eternally relevant. It was a preview of how World War II would end. Hitler's catastrophic decision-making. His refusal to allow tactical retreats. His willingness to sacrifice entire armies rather than admit error. Stalingrad was the template that would repeat at Kursk, in Normandy, in the Battle of the Bulge, and finally in Berlin itself. The battle also revealed a terrible truth about totalitarian warfare. When dictators treat soldiers as expendable assets, when political considerations override military logic, when ideology replaces strategy, armies die. Both Stalin and Hitler were willing to feed millions into the inferno. But at Stalingrad, it was Hitler's army that burned. The ruins of Stalingrad, now Volgograd, became a graveyard where the Wehrmacht's aura of invincibility died. Soviet factories, relocated beyond the Urals, were now outproducing Germany. The Red Army, bloodied and broken in 1941, had learned to fight. The tide had turned. The long, terrible march to Berlin had begun. In the end, Stalingrad matters not just because of what happened there, but because of what it revealed. Hubris kills empires, tyranny breeds disaster, and sometimes in the darkest moments, sheer human determination can break even the most powerful military machine ever assembled. The city that refused to die became the tomb of Hitler's dreams of conquest. And the snow-covered ruins along the Volga became the place where, finally, the monster began to bleed.